Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. We love seeing how far our stories travel. If this story moved you, imagine what we have in store for you tomorrow. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next powerful tale. Trust me, it's one you won't want to miss. Comment below with your thoughts, and let's keep the conversation going. See you in the next story. She risked everything for a stranger and got the ultimate reward. The diner door swung open with a soft chime, letting in a gust of cold air as Jake stepped inside. His shoulders were hunched, his clothes slightly worn, and his hands rubbed together for warmth. He looked around, his tired eyes scanning the room, before slowly making his way to the counter. Emma, a 26-year-old waitress with a warm smile and kind eyes, greeted him with a polite nod as he sat down. "What can I get you?" she asked, flipping open her notepad. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled wallet. He fumbled with the zipper before pulling out a handful of coins. His fingers trembled slightly as he counted them, placing each one on the counter. A few nickels, some dimes, and a couple of quarters. Not even enough for a small cup of coffee. He sighed, his shoulders sinking, and hesitated before looking up. Emma's heart tightened at the sight. She had worked at this diner long enough to recognize when someone needed more than just food. They needed kindness. She glanced over her shoulder. Mr. Peterson, the manager, was busy with paperwork near the register, not paying attention. Without a second thought, she grabbed the coffee pot and poured a fresh steaming cup. Sliding it in front of Jake, she gave him a small, reassuring smile. "It's on me," she whispered. Jake's eyes widened in surprise, his fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic mug as if it were the first real warmth he had felt all day. For a moment he didn't speak, just holding the cup and watching the steam rise. Then, finally, he lifted his gaze to Emma, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured. Emma simply nodded as if it was the most natural thing in the world. To her, it was just a cup of coffee. But to Jake, it was more than that. It was warmth. It was dignity. It was a reminder that, even in the hardest of times, kindness still existed. As he took his first sip, a faint smile touched his lips. A single cup of coffee, freely given, carried more weight than Emma could have ever imagined. Jake took another sip of the coffee, savoring the warmth as it spread through his body. He looked up at Emma once more, nodding in appreciation. She smiled back, glad she could help in some small way. But just as she turned to grab a fresh pot of coffee, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Emma!" She froze. The sound of Mr. Peterson's voice always carried a weight of authority, but this time there was something colder in his tone. She turned to see him standing near the register, his arms crossed, eyes locked on the steaming cup in front of Jake. Did he pay for that coffee? Emma swallowed. She could feel the eyes of other customers beginning to shift in her direction. A few of the cooks had even peeked out from the kitchen. She took a breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, sir," she admitted, keeping her chin up. "I gave it to him." Mr. Peterson's expression hardened. "You gave it to him?" His voice rose slightly, causing a couple of customers to glance over. "Emma, this is a business, not a charity. You don't just hand out food to people who can't pay." "It was just a cup of coffee," she said, forcing herself to stay calm. He looked like he needed it. "That's not your decision to make," he snapped. "We have rules for a reason. If we start giving away food to everyone who walks in, we won't have a diner left to run." Emma's heart pounded, but she stood firm. "With all due respect, sir, if a simple cup of coffee is enough to bring this place down, then maybe we're not as successful as we think." A hush fell over the diner. Someone dropped a fork. A few customers exchanged uneasy glances. Even Jake, who had been quietly sipping his coffee, tensed in his seat. Mr. Peterson's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "Enough," he barked. "If you can't follow the rules, then you don't belong here." Silence. The words hit her like a slap. Emma blinked, stunned. Was he really doing this? Over a cup of coffee? She could feel the sting behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not now. Instead, she took a steady breath, reached behind her back, and untied her apron. With slow, deliberate movements, she folded it and placed it on the counter. "I hope one day you realize that kindness brings more to this diner than a few extra dollars ever could," she said softly. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The diner felt different the next morning. The usual hum of conversation was quieter, the clatter of silverware on plates somehow duller. A few regulars whispered among themselves, still shaken by what had happened the day before. Emma was gone, fired, and all because of a cup of coffee. Mr. Peterson stood behind the counter, stiff and irritable. He had expected business to go on as usual, but something felt off. The waitstaff moved slower, the cooks barely spoke, and even the customers seemed uneasy. He tried to ignore it, telling himself he had done the right thing. Rules were rules. But as he poured himself a cup of coffee, the diner door swung open, and everything changed. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade pulled up outside, its engine purring as the door opened. The man who stepped out was familiar, except now he looked nothing like the weary stranger from the night before. Instead of worn-out clothes, he wore a crisp navy suit, polished dress shoes, and a sleek watch that caught the light as he adjusted his cuff. His graying hair was neatly combed, and his posture radiated confidence. Mr. Peterson's stomach dropped. The man, Jake, walked inside with a calm, deliberate pace. He glanced around the diner, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room before landing on Mr. Peterson. "You're the manager, correct?" Jake's voice was steady but carried a weight that made the room fall silent. Mr. Peterson hesitated, then straightened his back. "That's right. Can I help you?" A slow smile crossed Jake's face, but there was no warmth in it. He reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a sleek leather business card, and placed it on the counter. "Richard Lawson, CEO. American Comfort Diners." Mr. Peterson's breath caught in his throat. He snatched up the card, reading the name again, as if hoping he had misread it. His hands suddenly felt clammy. "I was in here yesterday," Richard continued, his tone cool. "Undercover." The words hit like a freight train. A few waitresses gasped. A customer dropped their spoon, and someone in the kitchen cursed under their breath. "I wanted to see how this diner, one of my diners, treats people. Not just paying customers, but everyone," Richard said, his voice sharp. "And I got my answer." Mr. Peterson's face drained of color. "Sir, Richard held up a hand, silencing him. "I want to speak to Emma." Mr. Peterson swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had made a terrible mistake, and now he was standing face to face with the man who had the power to shut this place down with a single phone call. I don't know where she is," Mr. Peterson stammered. Richard exhaled sharply, clearly unimpressed. "Find her," he ordered, his voice firm. "Now." Without another word, Richard turned and walked out, leaving the entire diner in stunned silence. The moment the door shut behind him, the whispers began. Mr. Peterson's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, dialing frantically. One of the waitresses, Lisa, stepped forward. "I know where she lives," she said quietly. 20 minutes later, Richard pulled up outside a small apartment building on the other side of town. The place was modest but tidy, with potted plants lining the steps. He climbed the stairs and knocked firmly on the door. A few seconds passed before it cracked open. Emma stood there, her eyes red and puffy, wearing an old hoodie and leggings. She looked exhausted. The moment she saw who was standing at her door, her body stiffened. "Mr. Lawson?" she asked, confused. Richard gave a small nod. "May I come in?" Hesitantly, Emma stepped aside, letting him into the tiny apartment. He glanced around, noticing the pile of unpaid bills on the table and the quiet hum of an oxygen machine from the next room. Her mother's medical equipment. Emma folded her arms. "If you're here to tell me I was wrong for what I did, you're wasting your time." Richard's lips twitched, almost amused. "Actually, I'm here to offer you a job." Emma blinked. Job?" Richard nodded. "Not just a job, a promotion. I own American Comfort Diners. The very diner you worked at is one of mine." He paused. "You didn't just serve a cup of coffee yesterday, Emma. You showed kindness, real service, and that's the kind of person I want leading my restaurants." Emma stared at him, her mind spinning. "That's not all," Richard continued. "I heard about your mother's condition. I'll cover her medical bills. And your brother, Noah, right? I'm setting up a college fund for him." Emma's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill over. Why would you do this?" Richard smiled. "Because you reminded me what true service looks like." Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. A day ago, she had walked out of that diner humiliated, believing she had lost everything. And now, standing in front of her was Richard Lawson, one of the most powerful men in the restaurant industry, offering her not just a job, but a future. She swallowed hard. I, I don't know what to say. Richard smiled, a glimmer of warmth in his otherwise sharp eyes. Say yes, he said simply. Say yes, and let me help you the way you helped me. Emma glanced toward the small bedroom where her mother rested, the steady hum of the oxygen machine filling the silence. She thought about Noah, who had been working extra shifts just to save for college. The weight of responsibility had sat on her shoulders for so long that she had almost forgotten what hope felt like. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes? Richard nodded, satisfied. Good. I'll have my team draw up the paperwork. You'll start as the new assistant manager at the diner, with full benefits. And as for Mr. Peterson, a small smirk played on his lips. Let's just say he won't be making any more hiring decisions. Emma exhaled, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over her. Just yesterday, she had been fired for doing the right thing. Today, she was being rewarded for it. But what neither she nor Richard could have predicted was what happened next. The story spread. Fast, a customer at the diner had witnessed everything and shared the tale online. Within hours, the post had gone viral. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with people praising Emma's kindness and Richard's response. The diner, once just another stop on a busy street, had become a symbol of compassion. Strangers began showing up, not just to eat, but to pay it forward. People left extra tips, bought meals for those in need, and shared their own stories of small acts of kindness that had changed their lives. As Emma stood in her tiny apartment, holding the business card that would change everything, she finally let the tears fall. A single cup of coffee. That's all it had been. But sometimes, the smallest gestures have the greatest impact. And kindness, it always finds its way back. What would you have done in Emma's shoes? Would you have risked your job to help someone in need, or played it safe and followed the rules? Moments like these define who we are, and sometimes a single act of kindness can change everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a time when a small act of kindness made a huge impact, either something you did or something someone did for you? Share your stories in the comments below. And what do you think about Richard Lawson's decision? Did he handle the situation the right way? Should more companies value kindness over strict policies? Let's talk about it. Your opinion matters, and we love reading your insights. Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next powerful story. You never know. The next one might just change the way you see the world.